Both of these are the same disc. They're both getaways, except this one weighs 174 grams and this one weighs 154 grams. That's 20 grams of difference. It's about 5 dice for reference, which isn't all that much. And in this episode of Physics of Flight, we're gonna dive into the differences between the two discs and how they fly, and what situations are best to use either one of them. There can be a little bit of a stigma against throwing lighter weight discs, like you have to be big and strong to throw the heavier ones, but I don't necessarily think that's true. While it might apply to some small children or junior players who are just starting out, the lighter discs can be a huge help to them. I don't necessarily think it applies to most people. I like to think of it like throwing a wiffle ball compared to a baseball. The wiffle ball is going to come out of the hand faster, but it's probably not going to go as far because that wind resistance is going to slow it down. Whereas a baseball is not going to come out of the hand as fast, but it's going to carry a little bit farther because it has a little bit more mass to carry through that wind. But if you were to throw both of those in a tailwind, the wiffle ball is probably going to go a lot farther because the wind's going to be able to carry it and push it farther than the baseball. But that's what we're going to test on this episode of Physics of Flight using science. So for this segment, we've got Eric Oakley. He's going to be throwing some air felons and some max weight felons. And we tried to find some felons that were the same stability. So we had him go throw some air felons and then throw some max weight felons and try to get sort of the same flight, because we're not really testing the stability of the disc here. We're just testing the result in the distance that it gets when it's thrown at Eric's pretty much his maximum power. So for this test, we are throwing a little bit downhill and we do have a little bit of a tailwind. So this is definitely set up for the air felons to succeed. Like I said earlier with a wiffle ball compared to a baseball, in that tailwind, it's going to carry the air plastic a little bit farther compared to the max weight plastic because it's not going to have as much resistance. So if we're going to see the air plastic outdrive the max weight plastic, this would be the test for it. Let's check it out. So for this segment of Physics of Flight, we're testing light plastic versus heavy plastic. I have Eric Oakley here as a guinea pig to throw some shots, and we're going to test some air felons versus some lucid felons. And we know the air felons are going to come out of the hand faster, but we're looking for whether they slow down faster and whether they end up going any farther. Because they are lighter, the idea is the air is going to slow them down so they don't end up going any farther or any shorter than the lucid felons. So we have a little bit of a tailwind here, which if anything is going to carry the air felons farther and give them more distance compared to the lucid. What do you think, Eric? Have you tested anything like this before?
No, I haven't done anything like this, but realistically, I'm kind of excited to see, putting a full rip on felons is fun. It's like one of my favorite things to do. So I'm really excited to see how I can stretch some of these out and see the results in the end.
Okay, so we have the air felons here. Normally air plastic is a little bit less stable than the lucid plastic, so the lucid felons that we chose are about the same stability as the air plastic ones. It's not like we're testing a big turnover shot versus a hyzer. He's trying to throw the same shot with both, so we're just testing whether the lighter plastic goes farther. So which do you want to start out with, the air or the lucid?
Let's go with the normal lucids, and
okay.
Then we'll test out these airs.
So these are all pretty close to max weight. That's going to be just under 20 grams of difference in weight, so that's the biggest separation we could find. So I've got the radar gun here, and you're going backhand for all of them?
Yes, backhand for all of them.
Perfect. All right, so you threw that one flat and let it work a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, that was 66 miles an hour.
Not bad. I came over it a little bit, but especially in a tailwind with the felon, if you're wanting it to kind of get going and go places, you got to force it over a little bit.
66 again. 65. Let's see if we can replicate that with the air felons, and we'll see if they come out faster. 68, so definitely faster than the lucid.
Yeah, quite a bit. Got that one in the air too. Allowed it to fly.
69. But that one looks like it's turned over a good bit. Oh, it still came back.
Yeah, it did.
So that would be like a maximum distance line if that's what you were going for, don't you think?
If I was throwing a felon for max distance, that's what I would be looking for.
Okay. 68.
We're already 3 miles per hour faster.
Yeah, so the lighter discs are definitely coming out faster. Let's go see how the results are. So this is the farthest that the air felon went, and he threw this one at, I think it was 69 miles an hour. That was a smash. And as far as lucid is right over there. 66, that's a crunch. $67. That's faster than what you were throwing last time, right? 66.
Don't get over on that one. I'm marking.
67.
They just don't go.
That one did not come out of your hand any faster than the other ones, too. 67. All right. 67. That's about the same line as the other ones.
Yeah, that was good.
66. $66. Mm-hmm. 65. That's a smash.
That was just a really good angle.
Gosh. 67.
That one's out there.
That one's a smash. If that one's not farther than the Lucids, then we have confirmed that that max weight goes farther.
That one felt great.
69.
That was on an Anheuser. I think that one had a chance.
To beat the Lucids. This is your last chance to beat a Lucid Felon flight with a Lucid Air. Just send it. 69. It's on an Annie.
Oh, baby.
Oh man, that's a full flight. That's a full flight if I've ever seen one. All right. So we just got done throwing a whole bunch of shots. How's your arm feeling?
I'm a little tired, but definitely worth the process to figure out kind of what these discs are going to do in these different weights.
So the results that we saw was we threw you threw the max weight Felons compared to the 158 gram Air Felons, and you tried to get them on mostly the same line. I'd say you did that for the most part. You kind of had some that didn't quite flip all the way over, but most of them got to flat at least, and so they got the full flight out of them. And the Air Felons definitely came out probably about 3 miles an hour faster. I'll have the actual number on screen now. And the results as far as distance was the Lucid Felons actually ended up out driving the Lucid Air Felons because they were they were just carrying farther and they weren't getting slowed down by the wind as much towards the end of the flight, even though they weren't coming out as fast. Did you think that's what was going to happen, or did you think the lighter disc would go farther?
I honestly thought the lighter disc had the potential to go farther, but you know, I was getting behind a couple of these, and they just seemed like once they got out to their maximum distance, they kind of just fell out of the air, where that heavy weight, I think, just helped keep the disc propelling somewhat forward and carrying on its way. So it's definitely an interesting concept, but you know, I think one thing we've talked about is the difference between, you know, speed of arm, and I think because I can get this disc up to speed and this disc up to speed, this one keeps going farther because of that added weight.
For example, like if I didn't quite have the arm for a max weight trespass and I threw the lighter weight like an air trespass, it could come out of my hand with enough speed to fly like a trespass should, as opposed to not getting it up to speed and fading out. So if you're looking to step up to a distance driver or something that's not quite in your arm speed, you're kind of trying to reach for a little bit extra distance, you can try that disc in the air plastic, and that might get you that little bit of extra speed so you can actually utilize that disc to its full distance. Any last thoughts, sir?
No, honestly, if you do have that slower arm, I would 100% try some of our air plastic. It's got a great feel, and you're going to get a very similar flight. These Felons were surprisingly overstable for how lightweight they are, and we were able to throw them into some good winds, and they were able to hold up and, you know, show a true test. So I feel like that's a testament to the consistency of the plastic, and people should actually be giving it more of a shot.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
course, thank you.
So that was definitely not the result that I expected. I definitely thought that the air plastic, especially with the little bit of a tailwind that we had, they were going to go farther, but we ended up not seeing that. So I think Eric Oakley said it really well. When you get the disc up to speed, it doesn't really matter how heavy it is. So as long as you can get that disc up to speed, it's going to fly correctly. But if you're looking to step up to a disc and you're not quite sure if you have the arm speed to get it up to speed, that's when the air plastic can definitely be beneficial. But let's find out how that translates to something a little bit more practical on the course. For this test, we had Zach Melton throw a bunch of Air Mavericks compared to max weight Lucid X Mavericks, and we're gonna see which one ends up being more consistent and more accurate. So for this segment of Physics of Flight, we are continuing to test heavy discs versus lightweight discs. I have another 1,000 rated guinea pig here. This is Zach Melton, one of the best lefties in the world, and I have two Mavericks here, and we are going to have a target out in the field, also known as Robert McCall is going to be out there, and he's going to be marking how far away each of these discs are from the target. So in your experience, do you throw any lighter weight discs, and have you noticed any results from doing that?
I don't go as light as like around the 150 range, but I do generally try to throw drivers around like the 170 instead of max weight. I don't know if it's a big difference I don't think in stability, but it just seems like max weight I don't have to throw as hard.
Just a little bit easier to get up to speed.
Yeah.
Awesome. That lines right up with what we've been finding out. And so this one has your name on it, and this one does not. So you're probably gonna be inclined to throw that one better. The Lucid X Maverick, Zach Melton Signature Tour Series. Plug, plug, plug. So along with measuring the total distance away from the target, we're also gonna measure the standard deviation, because Zach's likely to be more used to throwing the heavier discs, so he's gonna probably put that one a little bit closer, but the standard deviation will measure the consistency, and I'll sort of explain that as we wrap it up in the end. But are you ready to get going?
Yeah.
All right, let's get started.
We're good to go.
So for this test, the wind was a bit of a challenge. We could either have a left to right headwind or a left to right tailwind. Given Zach was throwing an understable disc, we went with the left to right tailwind. This meant that the difference between staying on a slight hyzer and getting all the way to a flat angle ended up making a huge difference. Even though we tried to match the stability between the two discs, the Air Maverick was still less stable than the Lucid X, which meant it flipped to flatten more often and ended up with a lot of shots that were left of the target. To measure the accuracy, we measured from the one point where Robert stood, and in hindsight, that was a bad move. Zach wasn't as comfortable with the Air Maverick, so even though he got a consistent result, it was consistently left of the target. I think that doesn't necessarily mean that the lighter disc is less accurate, it just means it's less stable. So let's talk results. The average distance to the target for the max weight Maverick was 13 feet 10 inches, and the average for the lighter weight Maverick was 29 feet and 2 inches. But that doesn't tell the whole story. The Air Mavericks were consistently landing to the left side of the target because they were flying less stable. So rather than looking at the distance from the target, a better measure of the consistency is in the standard deviation. That's because even though they weren't close to the target, they were close to each other. The standard deviation for the max weight was 7 foot 10 inches, and the Air Maverick was just 8 feet. So even though the lighter Maverick wasn't as close to the target, it was almost just as consistent as the heavier one. I think the slight lean towards the heavier disc was because Zach was more comfortable throwing it. So based on these results, my conclusion is that while the weight of the disc does have a small effect on consistency, player comfort appears to have a much bigger effect. If I were to do this experiment again, I would have Zach try to throw the same angle and power repeatedly and just gather the results based on where the discs land to get raw consistency numbers. So that test didn't exactly go as planned. If you look at the raw numbers, it's clear that the max weight Maverick was a lot closer to the target than the Air Maverick, but they both had about the same consistency. So I think it's a matter of comfort. Zach is really used to throwing the max weight Lucid X Mavericks. That's a big part of his game. And so he was really used to the type of shot that those flew on. And so when he threw the Air Maverick, it definitely flew a little bit of a less stable line, but it was just as precise as the max weight one, so it could consistently land in the same spot. That just wasn't where we had designed the test to be. So moving on to the next test, how does air plastic perform when the wind picks up a little bit? The wind is kind of seen as the Achilles heel of air plastic, and a lot of people are not as comfortable pulling it out of their bag when the wind picks up. But let's test and see how reliable these discs fly in a little bit of a wind with Paige Shue. So for this segment of Physics of Flight, we're testing heavyweight versus lightweight discs in the wind, and I have 2018 FPO World Champion Paige Bierkes here with me. She's going to be another guinea pig for this episode, and we have 6 discs. We have a max weight and an air plastic Maverick, a max weight and an air plastic Getaway, and a max weight and an air plastic Sheriff. And we're going to throw those in a tailwind and a headwind, and we're going to see what the difference is. But first, Paige, do you have any experience throwing lighter weight discs?
Yeah, my preferred weight range, I guess, is in the 160s. So not necessarily heavyweight and not necessarily the air plastic, but kind of in the middle. For me, I just feel like the lighter weight kind of goes further for my arm speed.
So do you think that with the top MPO players using the max weight discs, do you think more of the average golfer would benefit from using the lighter discs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
Okay, well, let's see how they fly in the wind.
Perfect.
So Paige first threw these discs in a tailwind. It's important to remember that what causes discs to fly less stable is speed relative to air, not the ground. We already know that the lighter discs will have more speed on release, but we don't know if that's enough to cause a difference when the airspeed changes. There was a little bit of difference in the Mavericks and the Getaways, but because both of them were getting up to speed relative to the air, there wasn't a huge difference in the result. But with the Sheriff, Paige was able to easily get the air plastic up to speed and get a nice slight flex line. Because of that, it ended up going a lot farther, around 50 feet. But with the slower release of the max weight Sheriff, it wasn't able to get up to as much speed, so it faded out much sooner. Here you can see how the slower discs were fairly consistent, but the Air Sheriff was way farther. In the headwind, we're looking for how much of an effect the faster release has on the lighter discs. The Air Maverick definitely had quite a bit of turn because of the added airspeed. The extra wind added to the already higher release velocity of the lighter plastic and caused it to turn more. The Getaway is a pretty stable flyer, so even though it was flying faster, it still held the hyzer fairly well, and there wasn't a big difference between the lighter and the heavier one. And the Sheriff, like the Maverick, had quite a bit of turn because of the extra airspeed. In general, it seems like the difference in flight between discs is exaggerated in a headwind and minimized in a tailwind. So we just finished throwing some of the air plastic and the heavy discs in the wind. Paige, what do you think about the results? Did you see one going farther?
Yeah, well, it seemed like the air plastic was a little bit flippier. It wasn't able to quite handle as much power as I was wanting to put on those particular discs. But yeah, it seemed like, I mean, the regular discs were going a little bit further, it seemed, just because they were able to handle all that power.
That's the headwind. Do you think the tailwind of the Sheriff ended up going about 50 feet farther than the other one there? Definitely the...
Yes, wait, which one went further, the Lucid or the Air?
The Air.
The Air one.
The Air one, definitely.
Oh, yes, with the tailwind, yeah. I think it helped get that extra push because it is lightweight, and that tailwind definitely helped it a little bit.
So do you think you're going to change your disc selection, or you think people should change their disc selection based on what the wind is doing?
Absolutely, I think so. The wind definitely affects all different types of discs in different ways. So my recommendation is to practice, see what happens to your discs in these type of winds so that you're prepared and ready when tournament time comes.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So in that last test, we definitely learned that the air plastic will go quite a bit farther in a tailwind. When you can get the discs up to speed, Paige was seeing a good bit more distance out of the Sheriff, but back into the headwind, because the discs are already coming out of her hand at a faster speed, the headwind added to that with the lighter discs and definitely gave them a little bit of extra turn. So I maybe wouldn't reach for these discs in a headwind, but in just about anything else, you're probably going to be able to take advantage of the wind more if you can figure out how to have it work for you. You're going to see a lot more distance out of those air plastic. So that's it for this episode of Physics of Flight. We've tested whether the air plastic will go farther than the max weight, we've tested whether it's more accurate, and we've tested its reliability in the wind. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're going to be challenging a lot of the myths about shot shaping and what ends up being the most powerful release. So we'll see you next time on Physics of Flight.